Hey folks, Alan Saunders from SteelersNow.com. Another episode of Steelers Morning Rush coming to you on Monday, August 5th. It is an off day for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but it's not an off day for us here at SteelersNow.com. Actually, I'm expecting it to be a pretty busy one, so let's get into it. I have a great topic for today's show, and I'm pretty excited about it because this is something that I think you guys as a fan base have kind of brought up organically, and I'm excited to get into it. So, we've been talking a lot about what happens at training camp every day. The Steelers have now had 10 training camp practices, 9 at St. Vincent College and 1 at Latrobe Memorial Stadium. And, of course, every day I'm on here on the practice report, on this show, on Afternoon Drive, talking about what happened at practice, what happened during Steelers training camp, and, making conclusions, talking about what we should think about what happened at training camp. And a lot of people have brought up, hey, what does this really mean? We remember last year, everyone thought Kenny Pickett was going to be great. And this is just training camp. Does it really mean anything? And that's a really, really good point. I think that's something that I'm certainly not missing. And I think I don't think a lot of other people are too, but I thought it was appropriate to just talk about, okay, what can you really learn from training camp practices and what can't you really learn from training camp practices, and where is it appropriate to kind of make big conclusions about what's happening, and where should you be a little bit more cautious? And so I kind of want to start with things that actually I don't even need to get to training camp to evaluate, but even back at OTAs and minicamp, the easiest thing to evaluate is physical attributes. Like when you see somebody in person, you can see how their size, their speed, their athleticism plays at this level, compares to the other players, compares to the players they may be competing against. It's one thing for me to write an article about Tariq Black, who the Steelers signed off the street in the middle of the second week. It's another thing for me to see him standing there in the jugs line next to guys, see him going through skelly drills next to guys, see his hands, see his effort level, his intensity, the way he carries himself. These are all things that you can pick out just by being around a player. Now, those traits are just a small component of what makes someone a good football player, but they're important. They're also important when they change, right? When I see DeMarvin Leal come out here this training camp with an obviously higher firing motor, he's flying around out there. He looks faster. He looks more decisive. He looks great. That's a change. That's different than last year. And so I think that's notable. And you look at a guy like Beanie Bishop and you say, okay, is he going to be able to hold up physically? Can he do the job? Can he hang with these bigger players? And you go out there and you watch and you see how you do it. I think the physical stuff, that is obviously something that you can evaluate. Something else you can evaluate is whether you say they are good or not. What the coaching staff thinks of a player is very obvious by the amount of opportunities they get in training camp. Like Beanie Bishop, I can't tell you how good Beanie Bishop is going to be, especially as a rookie. It is near unprecedented for an undrafted rookie to get the amount of playing time he appears to be getting. But that in itself says something. Like the coaching staff thinks that Beanie Bishop is going to be pretty good because they cut his only backup and he's playing starting reps from day one of training camp. And so we can just look at the way they're laid out, and the coaching staff doesn't get it right all the time, but it should at least give us a very good idea of what they think about that player. I got to training camp this year, and I was very surprised by the amount of seeing fullback Jack Coletto out there with the first team offense. I have gone from completely writing off the idea of the Steelers keeping a fullback on this roster to probably really considering it. I mean, at least 50-50 right now. And so those kind of things are pretty obvious just by the way guys are deployed in training camp. You see a guy like John Rice Plumlee, out there, we're doing receiver drills. He's returning punts. He's returning kickoffs. It's like, oh, the team might like him more than just being a camp arm at quarterback. And obviously there are other signs of this too, right? What guys are paid, how they were acquired. I assume that the Steelers like, Logan Lee more than they like Jacob Slade. One was a scrap heap free agent and one was a draft pick, but you still learn a lot more about the way you see those guys line up, the situations they get put into, the way they're coached, and all of that. The other thing I think you can evaluate is the scheme fit. Like you sit there and you see, whether or not this guy's a good football player, does he fit into what the Steelers are trying to do with their overall offensive or defensive concepts? The one of these that really stands out to me is Gennard Avery came in as a free agent. Was that last year or 2 years ago? Might have been 2 years ago from the Philadelphia Eagles. And he had been an NFL player and a fair one. Wasn't a star, but he was certainly a serviceable NFL player. And the Steelers had, the Eagles play 4-3 defense. Steelers play 3-4. They had to move him in position. And he came in, and he just never looked comfortable. He never looked like the player that you saw on tape. It never seemed to click with him, changing defensive schemes. And he asked to be released by the end of training camp. It was obvious to him, too, that it wasn't a good fit. But you can just sort of tell how a player fits into the scheme, how they're being used, how comfortable they look, that kind of thing. I think you can absolutely fairly evaluate that at this point of the calendar. But what about how good they are? What about the Kenny Pickett example, right? Well, I think the big thing there is you can sometimes evaluate training camp results successfully. And I think we should try. I don't think it's pointless to sit here and say, oh, he looked good at training camp. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it. But I do think you have to be cautious, especially when we're talking about players with significant NFL track records. Kenny Pickett came into Pittsburgh. His first training camp, he was a rookie. He didn't play that many games that year. He started, about 11 or something like that. Then he came into his second training camp, and he looked better. That's what we should have been expecting to see. Guys improve from their rookie year to their second year, almost always. And, that's the usual trajectory. And we didn't have counterexamples. We didn't have Kenny Pickett looking bad to balance out, the what we were seeing on the field in training camp. When you have players that have significant NFL track records, then you should be a lot more cautious about making sweeping determinations from what you're seeing at training camp. It's a lot easier for me to say how I feel about Beanie Bishop because I don't have any. All I have to go on for Beanie Bishop is this training camp and his college career, but mostly this training camp. Now, okay, Grayland Arnold with the Steelers playing the very same position. I'm going to balance what I'm seeing from Grayland Arnold with a lot more significantly with what I've seen from him in the National Football League for 2 or 3 years. And there's a big difference there. And so I think that's one of the things when you're talking about the Steelers quarterback battle and Justin Fields and Russell Wilson is that these guys have extensive NFL experience. These guys are essentially built players. They are not, Wilson is one that the Steelers are hoping does not physically decline, and I have not seen any physical decline in him. Actually, I think he looks better than I thought he would just based on what the numbers were in Denver. But, Fields isn't going to get physically better, likely. These are players that are likely going to be about the same as what they were before. There is no large reason for them to be changing who they are at this point. And so I think you should be pretty cautious about saying one is better than he's been before or better than the other just because of what's happening in training camp. Yeah, I absolutely buy that. And I think if you're approaching this from that standpoint because of what happened with Kenny Pickett last year, well, I think that was a pretty solid lesson in that regard. That doesn't mean that players can't improve. They absolutely can, even later into their career. You get into a different situation, you get with a new coordinator, you get into a different offense. We talked about the fit, right? That's a real thing. But we should be a little bit more hesitant, I think, to assume that someone is going to be better as an NFL player after 3 or 4 years just because of something that we're going to see in training camp when we know they've done what they've done on the field already, and we can fairly evaluate that. So that's my thought for today. Let me know what you think in the comments, and keep the questions coming. I'll have another episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive with Zachary Smith this afternoon at 5 o'clock. Until then, like, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss any of our videos here on the Steelers Now YouTube channel, and I'll see you next time.